The Zerov Empire's unstoppable rule. For centuries, the Zerovs' reign was the epitome of terror and dominance. Their empire stretched across the galaxy, each planet falling like dominoes under the weight of their superiority. In their wake, they left a trail of decimated civilizations and broken worlds, all crushed beneath the relentless march of their monstrous, insectoid form. These creatures, towering over 10 feet tall with massive armored bodies, seemed impervious to any conventional weaponry. Their exoskeletons were a sight to behold, black and shimmering, tougher than the hardest diamonds, deflecting any laser fire or projectile that dared approach. Their mandibles, sharp as the finest blades, could slice through the thickest metal as though it were butter, cutting down anything that stood in their way. A single Zerov warrior could level an entire city in the span of minutes. But what truly made the Zerov formidable was their technology. They possessed an arsenal so advanced, it seemed to defy the laws of physics. Their ships, great, looming behemoths, were designed to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies. The sheer size of their hive ships was enough to intimidate even the bravest species. These ships were equipped with weapons capable of decimating entire moons. Their technology could manipulate energy in ways no other species had ever dreamed possible. To many, it appeared almost like magic, an unstoppable force that could not be matched. Their empire was not just one of military might. It was an unyielding force of subjugation. The Zerov believed in the survival of the fittest, and they considered themselves the pinnacle of evolution. Other species were mere stepping stones, tools to be used or destroyed as they saw fit. The Zerov had no qualms about enslaving entire civilizations, forcing their inhabitants to either bow to their will or face annihilation. The few that dared to resist were swiftly wiped out, their planets reduced to smoldering ruins. At the helm of this vast empire sat the Hive Empress, a being of unimaginable power. Her abilities were beyond comprehension. A creature of both mind and body, she could communicate with and control her vast army of Zerov warriors through telepathic command, directing their movements with a single thought. Her psychic prowess was so advanced that she could manipulate the very fabric of space and time to ensure that her will was done. Under her reign, the Zerov Empire expanded endlessly, unchallenged and unstoppable. The Empress's hive mind operated with ruthless efficiency. Every decision was made with cold precision, and the Empire's borders continued to grow, inching toward the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The Zerov's once proud history of conquests became a routine. The very idea of resistance became a distant memory for most civilizations. The galaxy had learned to either submit or perish. Yet with each conquest, complacency began to creep into the Zerov ranks. Their victories, so consistent and predictable, lulled them into a sense of invincibility. They no longer feared the unknown because they believed no one was capable of matching their might. No new technology, no alien race, could challenge them. At least, that was what they thought. The Zerov had not reckoned with one simple truth: the heart of a species as adaptable, creative, and resourceful as humanity could never be underestimated. A new threat emerges. While the Zerov Empire basked in its unchallenged supremacy, an unseen force began to stir in the depths of space. Far from the prying eyes of the Zerov, humanity had been quietly building something incredible, a project that could change the fate of the galaxy forever. It began as a whisper, a faint signal in the dark reaches of space, but it was growing stronger, a human response to the terror of the Zerov. Dr. Lydia Ward, a brilliant scientist who had spent her life studying the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, was the driving force behind this initiative. After years of painstaking research, she had developed a theoretical energy source unlike any other. It could pierce through the invulnerable armor of the Zerov's war machines, disable their fleets, and shatter their unassailable power. The project was dubbed Nexus, a name that symbolized the connection between science, strategy, and human ingenuity. It wasn't just about creating a weapon. It was about leveling the playing field. Humanity knew they couldn't simply fight the Zarov with brute force alone. They would need to outthink and outmaneuver them. The key to the Nexus technology was the manipulation of quantum energy, a power capable of bypassing the Zarov's advanced shielding and armor. By tapping into this energy, humanity could create weapons of unprecedented power and ships that could move with the speed and agility the Zarov had never anticipated. But there was one more crucial factor: the human spirit. Unlike the Zarov, who had become trapped in their own complacency, humanity possessed an incredible ability to adapt, innovate, and overcome even the most impossible odds. While the Zarov had spent centuries relying on their overwhelming force, humanity had spent those same years developing new technologies, finding creative solutions to problems that would have stumped even the most brilliant minds. Dr. Ward's Nexus technology was humanity's greatest weapon, not just because of its power, but because of the ingenuity behind it. It was a weapon born not from the pursuit of domination, but from the desire to protect. It was a tool of survival, a beacon of hope for those who had long lived under the shadow of the Zarov. Humanity wasn't just preparing for a fight. They were preparing for a revolution. The spark of rebellion. In the years leading up to humanity's response to the Zarov Empire, Earth had undergone a transformation. It wasn't just a war effort, it was a movement. Every corner of human civilization, from the gleaming cities of the United Federation to the remote settlements on the frontier, had united in the face of a common enemy. The Zarov may have considered themselves the pinnacle of evolution, but humanity had something they couldn't fathom: unity through diversity. The seeds of the Nexus project had been sown by a coalition of human nations, all of whom had suffered under the brutal rule of the Zarov in one way or another. The more advanced human colonies, particularly those on the outer rim of the solar system, had seen the full scope of Zarov's conquest. They had witnessed their neighbors fall silent as the Zarov's high ships hovered ominously overhead, demanding surrender or annihilation. Dr. Lydia Ward was at the forefront of this collective effort, assembling a team of the galaxy's finest minds. From the chaotic streets of New Tokyo to the sprawling industrial complex of Mars, brilliant engineers, soldiers, and scientists came together in secret, determined to change the course of history. They knew that any attempt to confront the Zarov head-on with conventional forces would be doomed to failure. The Zarov's fleets were too vast, their strength too overwhelming. Instead, Lydia's plan focused on the one thing the Zarov had underestimated: human ingenuity. It was a long road, fraught with obstacles. Humanity had to draw from every scientific discipline to develop the Nexus technology: quantum mechanics, energy manipulation, advanced propulsion systems. Each field of knowledge contributed in ways no one could have predicted. But it was Lydia's ability to see beyond the limitations of their current understanding that made Nexus possible. Lydia had a vision. She would harness a form of energy that didn't just exist in the fabric of space. It could bend the very laws of physics. She theorized that by tapping into the quantum realm, humanity could create a concentrated form of energy that could destabilize the Zarov's advanced shielding systems. The human race would no longer be just a victim of the Zarov's tyranny. They would become the weapon that could turn the tide of the war. However, it was no easy task. The energy required for such a weapon was immense, far beyond the capabilities of existing technology. It would require years of research, development, and testing, and even then, there was no guarantee of success. Yet, as time passed, it became clear that the Nexus project was humanity's last hope. While the scientists toiled away in hidden laboratories across the galaxy, humanity's soldiers began their own preparations. General Marcus Graves, a battle-hardened strategist, was chosen to lead the human fleet. His reputation as a brilliant tactician was legendary, and his ability to think outside the box had already saved countless lives in smaller skirmishes. But this was different. The Zarov were no ordinary foe. It would take more than just military might to defeat them. It would require cunning, surprise, and above all, unity. a new weapon for an unlikely ally. The Nexus technology wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of hope. And as humanity's resistance began to take shape, a new ally emerged from the shadows. One of the most unexpected sources of aid came from the Draconians, a race of genetically enhanced beings who had been enslaved by the Zerov for generations. Once a proud warrior species, the Draconians had been reduced to mere tools of the Zerov war machine, forced to fight in their armies or face extinction. The Draconians, however, had never forgotten their heritage. They had quietly resisted Zerov control for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew they could never stand alone against the Zerov. They needed a partner, a force strong enough to shift the balance of power. And humanity, with its rapidly developing Nexus technology, had become that force. In secret meetings, Draconian representatives contacted the human resistance. They knew their survival depended on human success, and they were willing to offer their knowledge of Zerov tactics, fleet movements, and weaknesses. The Draconians' deep understanding of Zerov strategy would prove invaluable as humanity refined their battle plans. In exchange, the Draconians sought only one thing: a promise that they would no longer be enslaved, that they could reclaim their freedom and restore their civilization. Humanity agreed, forging a powerful alliance that would prove to be the Zerov's greatest nightmare. The collaboration between humans and Draconians was nothing short of revolutionary. Humanity's advanced tech, combined with Draconian martial prowess and knowledge of Zerov battle tactics, created a new breed of soldier, one capable of standing toe-to-toe with the might of the Zerov Empire. With their help, humanity was not just building weapons. They were building an army that could fight smarter, harder, and more efficiently than the Zerov had ever encountered. The spark of rebellion. The first public display of humanity's new strength came when the Zerov warships entered the Sol system, the heart of human space. The Zerov had grown accustomed to effortless victories, and they thought they could easily crush any resistance from such a primitive species. They sent a full armada to Earth, intending to show the humans just how futile their attempts at rebellion were. At first, everything seemed normal. The Zerov fleet emerged from hyperspace with their customary arrogance, hundreds of massive ships descending upon Earth's orbit. The planet's defense forces were already on high alert, but they were vastly outgunned. However, instead of retreating or begging for mercy, humanity's response was one the Zerov had never expected: a coordinated, fierce counterattack that sent shockwaves through their ranks. The battle began with the unexpected detonation of several advanced Nexus-powered missiles, which detonated in perfect synchronization as they struck the front line of the Zerov fleet. The missiles, which were designed using the new quantum energy technology, caused a chain reaction that disabled the Zerov's shielding systems and crippled their ships. The energy released by these weapons was so powerful it tore through the Zerov ships' hulls with ease. The Zerov were stunned. They had never encountered anything like this before. Their ships, which had been impervious to all forms of attack for centuries, were now vulnerable. Humanity's military fleet, aided by the Draconian forces, executed lightning-fast maneuvers, hitting the weakened Zerov vessels in quick succession. The once mighty Zerov, who had ruled the galaxy with impunity, found themselves on the defensive for the first time in their history. General Graves, standing at the helm of a newly designed human warship, watched as the battle unfolded. His eyes burned with determination. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to reclaim the galaxy." The first taste of victory was intoxicating, but it was also just the beginning. Humanity had proven that they were capable of standing up to the Zerov. But the real test had only just begun. Would the humans be able to maintain this momentum and drive the Zerov out of their space? Or would the might of the Zerov Empire prove to be too great? As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Zerov had underestimated humanity in ways they could never have imagined. This was just the spark of rebellion. What would follow would change the galaxy forever. The heart of the storm. The victory over the Zerov fleet had been swift, almost too quick for comfort. While the humans celebrated their unexpected triumph, there was an underlying sense of unease. This had been a single battle, a victory on a battlefield, but it was only one front in a war that stretched across galaxies. The Zorov were relentless, and their empire spanned far beyond what humanity had yet encountered. The war was far from over, and the most brutal challenges still lay ahead. Rebuilding the resistance. In the aftermath of their victory, humanity faced a difficult choice, whether to press forward with their newfound strength or consolidate their gains. There were factions within the resistance who advocated for caution, suggesting that they take time to rebuild and fortify their positions. But Dr. Lydia Ward, who had been working tirelessly on the Nexus technology, knew better. "Time is our enemy," she warned. "If we pause now, the Zorov will simply regroup and strike harder. We have one shot at this." She wasn't wrong. Humanity's victory had been decisive, but it was also a catalyst. The Zorov, who had long believed themselves to be invincible, were stunned, but their response would be swift. They had lost many ships in the battle, but they had vast reserves, millions of ships waiting in hidden sectors across the galaxy, prepared for retaliation. The Empire would not fall so easily. As the humans prepared for the next phase of the war, Lydia's team doubled down on their work. They knew the Nexus technology had potential beyond the initial weapons they had developed. It could reshape the battlefield entirely. The Nexus could manipulate the fabric of space-time itself, allowing human ships to fold space, travel faster than any enemy fleet, and potentially attack the Zorov where they least expected. But to unlock the full potential of this technology, they would need more than just a handful of weapons. They would need a new fleet, one built not just to fight but to outmaneuver and outsmart the Zorov. The humans began construction of the Eclipse fleet, a new generation of ships powered by Nexus technology. These ships were designed not only for battle but to be the symbol of humanity's defiance. Every ship would be equipped with the latest in quantum drive systems, shield systems that could bend light around them, and weapons capable of destabilizing even the Zorov's heavily shielded fortresses. The Draconians, meanwhile, had already begun organizing a massive force of their own. With their warrior culture and centuries of martial expertise, the Draconians were invaluable on the battlefield, but their approach was more direct and brutal. They saw the humans' cautious optimism and scientific advancements as critical, but they were also driven by a thirst for revenge. The Zorov had destroyed their civilization. Now they wanted to make the invaders pay. The humans, however, had a different perspective. "We can't let our desire for revenge blind us to the bigger picture," General Marcus Graves would often remind his soldiers. "If we're going to win this war, we need to be smarter than the Zorov, not just stronger." The Zorov counterattack. While the humans scrambled to build their new fleet, the Zorov were not idle. They began a calculated counterattack, targeting human colonies on the outer rim of the solar system. Their ships, which had been outclassed by the Nexus-powered weapons in the earlier battle, were now outfitted with improved defenses, an advanced form of adaptive shielding that adjusted to incoming threats in real time. The Zorov were learning from their losses, adapting, evolving, and becoming more dangerous with every skirmish. The first major engagement came when a Zorov fleet arrived in the vicinity of Jupiter's moons. This time, the humans were ready. The Eclipse fleet had been deployed, and for the first time, the power of the Nexus drive was truly tested in battle. The human ships folded space, appearing at impossible angles relative to the Zorov's ships. A single Eclipse vessel, the Horizon, emerged directly above the enemy flagship. In an instant, its quantum weapons discharged, destabilizing the flagship's shields and causing a chain reaction that disabled its internal systems. The battle was fierce, and casualties on both sides were high. But the humans, now bolstered by their new tactics and technology, began to gain the upper hand. The Zorov, who had once crushed human resistance with ease, were now on the defensive. Their adaptive shields, once seen as the pinnacle of technology, were no match for the Nexus-powered weapons, which had been engineered specifically to bypass them. However, the Zarov were not the type to retreat without a fight. In response to the humans' growing strength, they called upon their greatest weapon, the dreadnoughts, massive, city-sized warships that were capable of wiping out entire fleets with a single strike. These ships were impervious to most forms of attack, their shields and weaponry far surpassing anything the humans had encountered so far. The Horizon and the rest of the Eclipse fleet would soon face an overwhelming force. The test of leadership. As the battles escalated, the pressure mounted on General Graves and Dr. Lydia Ward. Despite their technological advantages, they knew they were on the verge of a tipping point. The dreadnoughts, now deployed in full force, posed an existential threat to humanity's fleet. If the human ships couldn't find a way to breach the dreadnoughts' formidable defenses, it wouldn't matter how advanced their technology was. The war would be lost. The alliance between the humans and Draconians, which had been forged in the fires of desperation, now became a defining element in their strategy. The Draconians had vast knowledge of the Zarov's weaknesses, but the humans had the technological edge. The two species' combined forces were the only hope against the might of the Zarov. Dr. Lydia Ward found herself in a difficult position. Her Nexus technology, which had been humanity's greatest strength, was still not enough to overcome the Zarov's latest weaponry. She had one last idea, an idea so risky that it might cost them everything. She theorized that if they could supercharge the Nexus energy to the point of singularity, they could create a weapon capable of not only breaching the dreadnought shields, but collapsing them entirely. But the energy required for such a strike would be unprecedented. Human lives could be sacrificed to power it. Lydia wasn't sure she could ask her people to make such a sacrifice. And yet, as the war raged on, the reality was undeniable. Humanity's survival might depend on it. At the same time, General Graves wrestled with his own moral dilemmas. He had led his soldiers through countless battles, but now he found himself staring at a stark truth. Victory would require more than strategy. It would require an unwavering commitment to the cause, even if it meant sending his people to their deaths. The final decision. The tension reached its peak during a secret meeting aboard the Eclipse flagship. Lydia, General Graves, and the leaders of the Draconian forces gathered in the war room. They had one final choice to make. Use the Nexus weapon to cripple the dreadnoughts and secure their victory, or find another way to fight, knowing that their current tactics might not be enough. Lydia stood before them, her face a mixture of determination and sorrow. The Nexus could win this war for us, she said quietly, but it will come at a cost. Are we willing to pay that price? Graves looked at her, his voice hard but resolute. We've already paid a price. Every day we fight, we lose more. But if we don't act now, we'll lose everything. The Draconians, who had always been driven by the thirst for revenge, nodded in agreement. They had lost their homes, their families, their entire civilization to the Zarov. For them, the stakes were personal. With a heavy heart, Lydia gave the order to initiate the final strike. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The human fleet, with the Draconians by their side, prepared for their final confrontation with the Zarov. The brink of extinction. The final moments of humanity's struggle had arrived, and with them, an unbearable weight hung over the crew of the Eclipse flagship. The decision to launch the Nexus weapon had been made, and now they had to face the consequences. Lydia Ward had always prided herself on being a scientist, a problem solver. But now, she found herself standing on the edge of a moral abyss, with the weight of countless lives resting on her shoulders. The Nexus technology could either be their salvation or their downfall, and there was no going back. The Nexus weapon. In the vast war room aboard the Eclipse, Lydia and General Graves stared at the holographic projection of the Zarov's dreadnoughts, their gargantuan shadows looming over the galaxy like malevolent gods. The scale of the threat had never been clearer. The human fleet, bolstered by the Draconians' forces, was ready, but even their combined might would be meaningless if they couldn't find a way to breach the near-impenetrable shields of the Zarov flagship. Lydia had spent countless hours, days, and months working on the Nexus weapon, a device that was designed to bend space-time at will, creating a singularity capable of obliterating the dreadnoughts. But what they hadn't anticipated was the sheer magnitude of the energy required to activate it. The Nexus, when pushed to its limits, could theoretically open a rift in space-time, one so powerful it could destabilize the very fabric of reality. And yet, the strain on the human fleet would be astronomical. The energy required could drain every remaining power source they had, and there was a real risk of the Nexus collapsing on itself. General Graves wasn't sure how much longer they could survive. Every battle, every clash with the Zarov had cost them dearly. Their fleet was down to half its original strength, with many ships damaged beyond repair. The Draconian forces had suffered similarly, their once mighty fleets reduced to smoldering wreckage. The situation was dire, and yet, in Lydia's eyes, there was still hope. If we can make it work, she thought to herself, we might just win. The final assault. The decision to launch the Nexus weapon was made under the specter of inevitability. The fleet gathered in a cluster around the human homeworld, Earth, their last remaining stronghold in the system. The Zarov had come too close. They had captured most of the outer colonies, and Earth, the heart of humanity's fight, was now their final target. The stage was set for a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Lydia's hand trembled as she stood before the control panel. The countdown had already begun. But before she could initiate the final sequence, a voice interrupted her. "It's not too late to turn back," General Graves said, his voice gruff but gentle. He walked up beside her, his gaze never leaving the display screen. "We could still fight them with conventional means. We don't have to risk everything on this." Lydia paused, her finger hovering over the launch button. The weight of his words cut through her like a knife. Could they fight the Zarov with conventional means? She had no answer. She had seen their losses. She had watched her friends and colleagues die in the crucible of battle. There was no time left for caution. "No," she said finally, her voice steady despite the internal storm. "It's our only chance." Graves nodded solemnly. "Then let's do it." The Nexus unleashed. The Eclipse flagship, with its massive, sleek hull glinting under the stars, activated its Nexus drive. The vast network of ships surrounding Earth mirrored its movements, their own Nexus drives beginning to hum with life. A shimmering rift of light began to form in the heart of the fleet, an impossible whirlpool of space-time folding in on itself. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening roar, the Nexus weapon surged forward. A singularity. A tear in reality, shot out from the heart of the fleet and shot toward the approaching Zarov dreadnoughts. The space around it warped and bent, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze in time. But the Zarov, ever adaptable, weren't blind to the humans' new weapon. They had expected a move like this. The dreadnoughts deployed their ultimate defensive measure, a shield known as the impenetrable vortex. A massive translucent barrier enveloped their ships, bending space around it to create a near-invincible fortress. It shimmered, deflecting the first wave of the Nexus weapon with ease. The humans had underestimated the Zarov's ability to adapt. The battle erupted into chaos. The Eclipse flagship and the rest of the human fleet poured every ounce of energy into sustaining the Nexus weapon, while the Draconian ships launched coordinated attacks to distract the Zarov and destabilize their defenses. Yet the mighty dreadnoughts remained impervious, their shields holding strong. The rift in space-time flickered and faltered under the strain. Lydia's eyes widened as the energy levels on her control panel began to spike. The strain was too much. "We're losing power," she said urgently. "If we don't act now, we'll be sitting ducks." Graves barked orders to the fleet, but the situation was spiraling out of control. The dreadnoughts were closing in, their colossal weapons preparing to fire. If the humans couldn't break through the shields in time, Earth would fall. Lydia's mind raced. The Nexus weapon, when activated fully, had the potential to unravel the shields of the dreadnoughts. But there was a catch. She had to increase the energy output to such an extent that it would overload the system. It would take every last drop of energy they had. There was no time for hesitation. She gave the command to the fleet. Increase the output by 150%. All ships, give us everything you've got. The entire fleet responded in unison, their engines glowing bright with unrestrained power. The Nexus weapon surge, a blinding pulse of light racing through the rift as it collided with the dreadnought shields once again. This time, the shields cracked. The rift in space-time pulsed and swelled, folding reality in ways that defied comprehension. Then, with a thunderous roar that shook the heavens, the shields of the Zarov dreadnoughts shattered. The Eclipse flagship, with its now diminished power reserves, fired the final shot. A concentrated burst of Nexus energy aimed directly at the heart of the flagship. The explosion was catastrophic. The dreadnoughts, those massive bastions of destruction, were consumed by the collapse of space-time itself. One by one, they imploded, their colossal forms ripped apart by the very forces they had once wielded as their ultimate weapon. The remaining Zarov ships faltered, caught in the gravitational maelstrom that had been unleashed. The human fleet surged forward, finishing what had been started. Victory at a terrible cost. As the dust settled, Lydia and Graves stood at the command deck, staring at the holographic display that showed the remnants of the Zarov fleet being swallowed by the collapsing rift. The Eclipse flagship and the rest of the human fleet, though battered, had emerged victorious. But the cost was undeniable. The Nexus weapon had drained every ship's power reserves to the brink. The Eclipse, now a shell of its former self, was adrift in space, its engines silent. Many ships in the human fleet were either destroyed or on the verge of collapse. The Draconians, too, had lost many of their warriors. The Alliance had won, but the victory was bittersweet. Lydia turned to General Graves, her face weary and filled with a quiet grief. "We did it," she whispered, "but at what cost?" Graves looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his gaze turned to the stars beyond, now clear of Zarov ships. "At a cost," he said slowly, "but we're still here. We survived. And now, we rebuild." And so, amidst the ashes of battle, the humans and Draconians began to chart their next steps. They had won the war, but the price of that victory would forever be etched in their memories. Their survival had come at the cost of nearly everything they held dear, and now they had to learn how to live again in the aftermath of a galactic war. For Lydia, the weight of their choices would never leave her. But as long as humanity endured, there would always be hope for the future. The price of survival. The aftermath of the battle had left the galaxy scarred. The explosion of the Zarov fleet had sent ripples through the fabric of space-time, causing shifts in gravitational fields, sparking a chain reaction that threatened the stability of entire sectors. The victory, though celebrated, came with a heavy toll. The humans and Draconians had suffered staggering losses, and the shattered remnants of their fleets drifted in the wake of their triumph. For Lydia Ward, the scientist who had birthed the Nexus weapon, the weight of the victory was almost unbearable. The very technology they had created to defeat the Zarov was now a symbol of their darkest hour. The weapon that had saved them also marked the beginning of their long road to recovery. And as they navigated the ruins of their once mighty fleets, Lydia found herself grappling with a deeper question. What does it mean to truly survive? The silent void. The Eclipse flagship hung silently in the vastness of space, its systems barely functioning, its engines crippled beyond repair. Its once pristine hull was marred by battle scars, and the once bustling command deck had become a somber hall of quiet contemplation. The human fleet, now in disarray, had made its way to the remnants of their homeworld's orbit. Earth, once vibrant, alive with the pulse of billions, was now a memory. The colonies had been lost to the Zarov, and Earth itself had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. General Graves had given orders to remain on standby as the survivors of the battle regrouped, But the truth was that there was nothing left to regroup. Earth's surface was barely habitable, its cities destroyed in the wake of the war. The remaining survivors were scattered, their numbers far too few to rebuild the vast civilizations they once called home. Lydia stood in the observation bay of the eclipse, staring out at the ruined planet below. She had seen countless worlds destroyed by the Zarov, worlds full of life, history, and dreams. But Earth was different. It was home. It was her home. And now it was gone. Its vibrant cities nothing more than broken husks, its landscapes ravaged by war. As she gazed out at the ruins, a small voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. It was Captain Eric, the draconian commander who had fought alongside them throughout the war. His race had been as battered by the Zarov as humanity had, and though he had been a fierce ally, Lydia could see the weight of their shared losses in his eyes. "We are not defeated," Eric said, his voice low but resolute. "We survived. That is the first step." Lydia nodded, but she could feel the uncertainty creeping into her heart. Survived, yes, but at what cost? How could they rebuild after everything had been lost? How could they carry on when so much of what they had fought for lay in ruins? The healing process. In the weeks that followed, the survivors began to assess the damage. Small, makeshift fleets had begun to form, each one carrying the remnants of humanity's hope. The Draconians, too, had brought their own survivors into the fold, uniting with the humans in the hopes of rebuilding what was lost. The remnants of Earth's population were brought into a new alliance, scattered across various stations and ships, working together to build the foundations of a new world. But despite the collective will to survive, the scars ran deep. The people, those who had lost everything, were not so easily healed. Survivors wandered in a daze, still haunted by the horrors of the war. Families were broken, dreams shattered, and identities lost. Humanity was rebuilding, yes, but it was not the same humanity that had once thrived in its cities and colonies. It was something new, something raw, uncertain, and scarred. Lydia was no different. As the head of the Nexus Project, she had seen firsthand the devastation that the weapon had wrought. What was meant to be a salvation had torn open the very fabric of the universe. The weapon had altered the way they understood reality itself. No one truly understood the full consequences of what they had unleashed. Now, as she walked through the corridors of the eclipse, she could hear the hum of makeshift machinery, the voices of the survivors, the endless chatter of a people trying to rebuild. But beneath it all, Lydia could feel the silence. The same silence that had plagued her since the Nexus weapon had been activated. She couldn't shake the nagging fear that humanity's survival came at a cost too high to measure. The ghost of the Zarov. Though the Zarov fleet had been destroyed, their influence was not so easily erased. The remnants of the alien empire still haunted the galaxy like a specter, their genetic legacy lingering in the war-torn sectors. The consequences of the war went beyond the loss of life. It had left behind a fractured galaxy, a void of power that no one could fill. Lydia had hoped that the war with the Zarov would mark the end of their reign of terror. But in the aftermath, new questions had emerged. What had the Zarov been searching for? What had driven them to conquer, to destroy, to enslave entire civilizations? And, more importantly, who would rise to fill the vacuum they had left behind? It wasn't long before rumors began to circulate among the survivors, whispers of other alien factions, power-hungry warlords, and dark organizations seeking to take advantage of the shattered state of the galaxy. The Draconians had already begun to deal with their own internal strife, and the humans, fractured by their losses, struggled to unite behind a common cause. Lydia had to face the uncomfortable truth. The war with the Zarov might have ended, but their legacy was far from over. The galaxy was still in chaos, and if they didn't act quickly, it might fall into the hands of those who sought to exploit its weakness. The burden of leadership. It was at this moment that General Graves called Lydia into his private quarters aboard the Eclipse. He had been the unquestioned leader of the human forces during the war, but now he found himself struggling with his own sense of purpose. The battles were over, but the struggle to rebuild had just begun. "Lydia," Graves said, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "We've fought the war, but now we need to face the future. The fleet's in disarray. Earth is gone. The Draconians are divided. And the galaxy, well, the galaxy is a broken place." Lydia listened intently, knowing that the burden of leadership had shifted onto them both. Graves had led the charge during the war, but now he turned to Lydia, the scientist, the creator of the weapon that had saved them. She had the knowledge, the expertise, but now she had to step into a new role, a role she had never imagined she would have to fill. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," Lydia said softly. "I built the weapon. I unleashed it. And now, I have to rebuild the galaxy. I don't know where to start." Graves leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You've already done it. You've given humanity a chance to survive. The galaxy may be broken, but it's still alive. And as long as there's life, there's hope. We'll find a way to heal it. Together. A new dawn." And so Lydia took on the mantle of leadership, though it was a role she never expected to assume. She began to work with the remnants of the human fleet, and alongside the Draconians, they charted a path toward rebuilding. The scars of war were everywhere, but with every decision, every step forward, they brought a little more light to the darkness. The survivors, though broken, began to come together. They found new purpose in the ruins, not just to rebuild what had been lost, but to forge a new future, a future built on the lessons of the past. The Nexus weapon had saved them, but now they needed something more. They needed unity. They needed hope. Lydia knew the road ahead would be long. The galaxy was fractured, and the legacy of the Zarov still haunted them. But she also knew one undeniable truth. As long as they kept moving forward, there would always be a chance for redemption. The war was over, but the fight for the future had just begun. And for the first time in a long while, Lydia could see the faintest glimmer of hope on the horizon. The road to recovery would be long, but they would walk it together.